As I mentioned here, I have dedicated this section to the structural columns that you can get access to them from the architecture tab, structural columns, and also clicking on a structure and clicking on column directly. And there is no difference between structural column and the column in the structure tab. Both are the same. First of all, note that these structural columns include all or most of the properties of the architectural columns. However, they got some more specific parameters for the industrial standards that are related to structural columns. And as you are concerned, there are some predefined settings and standards in the structure or structural industry that you have to be familiar with them in the structural discipline. I mean, here our job is structural engineering, not designing. It is used for building, not only decorating something. Therefore, we got too many parameters in structural columns comparing to architectural columns. And when we want to model or create these structural columns, we need or we are able to join them to beams, to trusses, to braces, to beam system, or the type of foundations, while the architectural columns do not join to these elements. This was their first difference. And note that the structural columns include some analytical lines that are used for the analysis process while you want to import your project to Robot, eTabs, and other softwares that we use to analyze the project using these analysis lines, while we do not have these lines in architectural columns. However, sometimes you are given an architectural file or plan that you want to start modeling them. That firstly you have to start from setting grids and then adding columns, since you can specify the position of the intersections between columns. In fact, you are fixing the positions of the columns, and as you move the grids, you move the columns as well. So in the first step, we draw the grids and then we go through adding columns, and you can add the columns in the plan view and also 3D view. It does not make difference, both are possible. And the structural columns are set to depth, as you can see, while the architectural ones have been set to height by default. This is the other difference. So before selecting structural column, I'm gonna add some levels here by this way. Check it out, 4 meters. One more. Well done. After that, I open level 1. However, let me delete these redundant levels, and we don't need ceiling plans, so we delete them. We only need floor plan. I select grids, then I draw these axes. 1 for the first one, second, third one, and I draw the horizontal grids A, and if I make some copies A, B, C, let me move them, and I want to add another grid by just making a copy like this way. Watch this. Then consider this 4, 3, 2, and 1. Well done. First of all, after drawing the grids by this way, as you can see, and then we open the views or the levels, they are visible. As you can see, they are visible in all of the views. But put this point into consideration that in Properties tab, let me open the Plan View Level 1 here in Let me open the 3D view. Here we got show grid option. If I click on this, then here we can define or control their visibility. For example, 3D view, you may have positive and negative levels in the 3D view. Here you can check all of the options or levels to show them in all of the levels or only at one. I set it to the default mode, level 1, and if we uncheck them, we hide all of them. Watch this, all of them are hidden, despite of the fact that the grids here in visibility graphic are shown. So, put this point into consideration that has been added to the new version of Revit, and I just shared my experience. Anyway, I get back to the plan view. As soon as I click on a structural columns in the option bar, we get some items, we got some placement methods or items, options, and the type properties and instance properties. In type selector, we can specify the type of the column, or we can load a new type by just load family. Let me open the structural column folder. Then we can select the concrete, metal columns, rectangular ones, rounded. Then I watch this concrete and steel. I select the concrete rectangular column. Then in option bar, we got rotate after placement, just like the architectural columns. If we check it, then we can rotate the column after placing the column automatically by just defining an angle and rotating it. So this is repetitive and we talked about it before. The next one is depth. That it starts from the height of minus 2.5 meters. If I set it to height up to level 2, and note that you have to create the structural columns separate for each of the levels, just like walls. For instance, from level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3, and so on. So they will be added between the structural levels. And we got the room bounding, just like the architectural ones, that it affects on the rooms and their areas that we check room bounding usually. And here in placement option, we got we can place the column vertically or slanted. Watch this, we can add them wherever we want, but if I set it to slanted mode, it means that we are enabled to add the columns slanted. But watch this, first click and second click for the positions, level 1 and level 1. But we can specify the height. I can assert from level 1 to level 2 or up to level 3, but we usually set to level 1 to level 2. 0. I click on here and here by this way. Then we will have a slanted column. I open the 3D view to show you the result. And note that in a slanted mode we got 3D snapping as well, but we do not have 3D snapping in the vertical column, because here we can click for 2 times. Okay, let me show you the slanted column in the 3D view. Watch this. What is the usage of the 3D snapping? But if I enable the 3D snapping, I can select the snapping of these vertical columns like this way, or I can start them from the center of other columns, like for drawing ramps. Okay, however, we can use the structural framing as well, since we usually use the structural framings to create such a geometry. However, we can use this structure for creating some temporary buildings in the projects. But here if I select the steel column or universal column, vertical or slanted, and creating them. and their options while placing them are the same with each other. And add grids. If we have set of grids, we can click on add grids and click and drag. Then the columns will be added at the intersections between the grids. Okay. After clicking and drag, we can click on finish to save the changes. I canceled it again. Add grid. As you can see, the grids are added at the intersections by this way. Let me delete these. And in the next case, we got add columns, which creates structural columns inside selected architectural columns. This is usually used for the architecture since you may have used the architectural columns by this. I add these architectural columns, and then as an structural engineer, okay, or as an architecture, that you want to add these structural columns. However, this is not our lesson for today, since this course is dedicated to architectures and specialized for the architects. So if we want to just add the structural columns inside the architectural ones, we can just click on add columns, and then we can use a click and drag and add the structural columns specifically inside the architectural ones. Watch this. Right now there is a steel column inside of them, and then we click on finish to save the changes by this way. So we can add the structural columns based on the positions of the architectural ones, and there is no dependency between the architectural ones and the structural ones. We can delete them independent to each other. So this was the process of adding structural columns. Vertically add grids and add columns.